Welcome to making the remote work shift work for you. Excited to share some of the things that I and others at Integral have learned as we've been fully remote working since the beginning of the pandemic and are now committed to staying a dispersed remote working company. We'll still have in-person things occasionally, but we've switched to that model fully. Um, Lindsay's going to go ahead and drop two links into the chat. They were also shared with you via email and prepped for this session. If you want to get both of those links open, I will be mentioning them in a minute. You don't need to do anything. Just go ahead and get them open here while I'm doing intro stuff. Uh, so yeah, my goal is to share and reflect on what's worked and what hasn't for me and for us here at Integral. As you can see, I'm in a van. I proposed this remote work topic months ago for a webinar because we've been remote working for a year. I have a home office, and our colleagues at Integral, we had folks that were moved entirely, just decided since we were remote, they moved across the country somewhere, folks that were working from their living room, folks that were taking care of their children while working and making that work with a spouse at home or a partner or just on their own. So all kinds of remote work setups. I decided, hey, why don't I try a van for a little bit? And then it just so happened that the webinar was scheduled while I'm on my first trip in this van. So I'm in Colorado, currently live in Detroit. Um, and I'm excited to talk about what we've learned, how we're making remote workforce work for us at Integral, and share some tools and explore those with you all and get your thoughts on how we use those tools and how you might use them. And maybe set some goals for how you want to do remote work. So we'll start by, in a minute here, jumping into looking at that Miro board that you just opened and be doing an activity with it. I'm guessing all of you are eating lunch or taking care of other things that you need to during lunch. So I've set that up to be able to multitask, but be ready to be able to write some things. You'll also notice where Lindsay shared those two links in the chat. You can also add messages in the chat. Please tell a joke, make fun of something I said, ask a question, banter with each other. The beauty of remote work and being on a web call like this is it's very easy to just do that in the chat. And I think it actually facilitates a way better session. So please use that chat. Um, and then last thing is, as I noted, I really want to do as much showing as I do telling or even more showing. And so as you are going through the session, there's gonna be a lot of opportunities to do things. And if you don't know how to do it, just ask. This is the space, I want this webinar to be a space where we can practice together, make mistakes, ask dumb questions, get real, etc. But do remember we are recording and no one here has signed an NDA. So please share your thoughts, ask questions, but also just be aware of kind of our limits and being able to protect privacy. I'm gonna jump into one more note kind of on context. Um, Kind of in a meta thought, I wanted to share as I was thinking about planning this session today. There were kind of several. Really, this is a remote webinar. We used to do these in person at our office in Detroit, and so I had several remote work problems that I wanted to prioritize solving. Part of why I mentioned this is I'm going to share a lot of thoughts today, but some of that you have to step back to the meta and go, well, what are you trying to accomplish, and what are the problems you need to solve? So I'm hosting a webinar. I tend to be very facilitative, very ask for a lot of client participation, showing and doing together over me just talking. And so I need to think about because I want people to connect with each other and I want them to learn by doing. So how do we all connect while we're on screens? How can people engage with the content and with the activities I'm asking them to do as a facilitative workshop person while they're eating lunch or doing the things they need to do at lunch? Um, how can I meet people where they're at? Remote work, there may be some of you in this group that have been remote working for a decade. I've been doing various versions of remote work for over a decade now and have used just about every tool under the sun. Some of you may be in that group, and some of you may be just getting started in remote work and are still figuring things out and learning. Lindsay, we just have a couple more people join. If you want to share those links again, if you didn't already, thank you. And folks that just joined, there's links in the chat. Please open both of those. I'll be giving instructions on them shortly. And lastly, what's the best way to introduce people to potentially new and complex or familiar and understood ideas about remote work? So these are some problems I had to solve. We're going to come back to this in discussion a little bit throughout. I would be curious your thoughts or feedback on how I've solved for them or questions about why I solved for them in the way I did. I'm not going to specifically go through and answer all these necessarily, but I want to at least give you a framework for how I came at approaching this session. All right, let's jump into talking about collaborative tools. I listed a bunch here. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but oh, before I do this slide, let's jump over now that there's everybody. It looks like we've had a few more folks join. Let's grab this note slide that you opened. This is one of the ways that I'm hoping that we can all support each other. I see a bunch of folks already have it open. If you don't, it's in the chat, in the Zoom chat for this call. Lindsay shared it there. It's the Google Docs link. If you could come in here and do this, you can right click on this, you can go up to slide, but duplicate the slide and then make one with your name on it. Can be in all caps. I actually don't capitalize my name at all. I see some folks already doing this. Feel free to keep going doing it. And I will explain what this is while you're duplicating and putting your name on the top of one. So we will use this for a short activity at the end that will allow us to collaborate on what we've learned from the session, what we're thinking. Feel free to come back to this slide at any point throughout the session. I may also pause and give folks 30 seconds or so throughout the session. So as you go through, I see it looks like we need a few more people to make sure they grab their note slides. You will need something in this for the end of the session. There'll be a short activity at the end to connect with each other's notes. So everyone will see what you write here. If there's stuff you want people to see, to take those notes elsewhere. But I'm curious to learn at least one thing that to hear at least one thing that you learned today, one question that you have, one change that you want to make, one help that you need. So as you're going through, you could have at least one. You might have 3 to 4 to 5 in each of these boxes. You can just add new bullets as you go. Are there questions about using this note slide before I continue forward? All right. Can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone should be making a copy here of this notes template. I see some folks have. If you haven't, please make sure to continue to do so. I'm going to jump back over to the slides while folks are making that copy. Also, if you need help figuring out how to make a copy of that note slide, please let us know in the chat and we can help make sure you get that. So let's list some of my favorite tools. The biggest thing I can say about tools is you can spend tens of thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of hours perfecting the remote work tools that you use. I have seen people build entire gaming systems to support remote work so that they can use a gaming system with a complex setup on it for the stuff they're doing for work. I've seen all kinds of complex things done in each of the favorite tools that I have listed here. Start small and then work towards investing the right amount of time and money for your needs. Remote working is probably the most important tip I can give here. And be patient. In order to learn what the right amount of time and dollars is, you'll start with something, you'll need to practice a lot with it, create feedback loops and conversations among your team, and then figure out what works. On that note, I want to jump us into one of Integral's favorite tools that we've started to use more and more and more throughout the pandemic as we were remote working, all remote working, and that's called Miro. So everyone should be able to click on that Miro link. And I will see folks start to pop in here as you do. So in the chat, there's a link to the Miro. We want to make sure to open the Miro. This is where we're going to start with an activity. Thank you, Lindsay. Give folks another 30 seconds to get into the Miro board here. Make sure if you need help grabbing that link, please do so. So Miro is a whiteboarding tool. When we were all in person, we're all a bunch of experimental folks that like to build software and imagine what software we can build and then figure out how to test it and make it a reality. So we really missed our whiteboards. Engineers would be in the middle of coding and jump up to a whiteboard to try to whiteboard something before they went back to the code. Our product folks use whiteboards a lot for the things that we do, posted activities with whiteboards, et cetera. Miro gave us a lot of ability to do that digitally remotely, and I want to show you some of how that works here today. So the first thing I'm going to ask folks to do, so this is Miro. There's a ton of tools on the left here that you can add different things. You can see I've set up, these are called frames. And then different activities, the same as I might do on chart paper or a whiteboard in person. Um, So we're going to start. If you could go ahead and do this left side, let me zoom in. And so you can zoom in by just like you would on your phone screen by using your two fingers. You can also zoom in with this tool over on the right. And then you can move the board by grabbing, just touching with two fingers or grabbing the board to move it. I've locked the things that shouldn't move. The first thing I want to ask you to do is to take a Post-it note here and put your job title um, over here. You just type into the Post-it. Um, and then also to go down here, and I'd like to know three things about your current relationship to remote work. Um, so do you, most of your percent of time, is it most of the time just in an office in a cube, wherever your office is? Or you don't always work remote, but you do always work a remote, just like the Dosakis man? I'd also like to know remote work decisions. For your decisions about how you remote work, do you not have control of any of them? In the X here. Do you only control decisions for yourself, or do you control decisions for entire teams about how remote work works? And the last thing, kind of your personal remote work capabilities. Are you just getting started on your journey? You're kind of graduated and know what you're doing, or you're an MFing wizard and got it down? Yes, we'll get to moving the post-its. So as we ask people to start here, Miro also allows you access controls. So all of you are currently set up as only being able to comment. If you now reload the page, you will be able to edit the board. These are really fantastic. You can control a lot of different access based on those controls. So I set everyone up as commenters, and now you can actually start to edit. So I see folks already grabbing this. Go ahead and get started. The other thing I want to note as you answer these three questions, feel free to use the emoji that best describes how you feel about where you are in these questions. You might love it, you might hate it, etc. I see folks getting started. Keep going. We'll give about 2 or 3 minutes to do this here. As you're finishing up, you'll also notice down below there's a little mouse waiting room. If you put your mouse over that, I'll see folks gathering there. Um, Feel free to grab a beverage while you're there, a little bit of cheese for your mouse, and that'll be a signal that you're done. All right, so nice work, folks. I see we've got a lot of folks that are quick at Miro here. We'll also note you can turn off collaborators cursors. So you notice here if you look back at the screen share, I'm clicking up here and I can hide cursors or show cursors. This is really useful because you can see where people are working if you want to see their cursors, but then when it gets a little crazy, you just go ahead and hide their cursors. All right, next part of the activity is to grab these Post-its up at the top above remote work experiences. And you can feel free to add as many or as little Post-its, but try to add at least one in each quadrant. I'd love to know what you love about remote working, what you hate about it, where you feel a little lost or stuck or confused, something that just is sticky for you, and anything you might want help on. Give folks about 1 more minute to fill out Post-its here. Again, if you're not done, there is that mouse waiting room over there. Feel free to hang out over there. If you're still thinking, feel free to think. I love the people that put the Post-its in rows. You all are my favorite people. I kind of am those people. I'm seeing slowing down. If everybody needs a little more time, feel free to do so. I did stop sharing my screen for a second. Pull it back up. Easy. All right, we are now going to do a quick little voting session. I'll show you one of my favorite Miro tools. They are this easy to set up. So I come in here, I click this little voting icon down at the bottom. I title this Remote Work Experiences. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to pick out the 3 Post-its that you most resonate with. You can pick your own if you want. You can pick someone else's. I don't want you to vote on the whole board, so I'm going to change this to be just this area Post-its. You can't do anything yet, but in a second I will start this voting session. Miro really facilitates a fantastic voting experience. So I want to know which of these you most resonate with that are on the board. I'm going to click Start Now. Everyone will see a voting session pop up, and you can just select your 3. When you are done, go ahead and jump over to the mouse waiting room again. So you should now see something that looks like in your browser, you should see something that looks like what I'm showing on screen and be able to vote on the 3 that you resonate with most. And then as you're done voting, feel free to hang out in that mouse waiting room or do whatever you want to do if you want to look at other parts of the board and go back. The folks that are still voting, you've got about 30 more seconds. And voting ends in 10 seconds, so make your final selections. All right, so then you'll be able to see the results of the voting section here. This is part of why I love this. You can do this all kinds of ways in person, or I've seen people do it with emojis and voting. What I like about Miro, it's a little slow for early right now, is how quickly it allows you to see the results. We see the flexibility is a favorite, a couple of favorite topics around boundary confusion and water cooler, missing the water cooler. And then quite a few votes down here for things that we resonate with around things we're lost on or want help with. I'm going to zoom in just so we can all be able to read those a little better, or you can be on your own Miro board right now. You don't have to be looking at my screen share. Missing analog, and then a lot of things kind of around kind of being at home and missing the human connection and managing the aspects of how different it is to work from home versus being in the office with people. Um, I will pause there. I'm going to ask, is there anything that anyone wants to comment on, ask about a card, clarify about what they meant on a card, before I move forward on kind of sharing how we might talk about some of the rest of these throughout the rest of the session? Right. So I will mention a lot of what I'm going to focus on is some of the stuff that we put in the lost quadrant. Um, And I may touch a little bit on this one. Whoever wrote that and whoever resonated with it, feel free to hold me accountable to do that because it's not in my slides, but some of the stuff in my slides, I can make sure to comment on some of what I've been able to do to help there with remote work. There could be right before the session, I was using my corded headset because it has better noise canceling and the sound stopped working. Uh, I am currently sitting at a desk with snacks and two laptops and a second monitor over here. Managing your home remote work setup is an entire other session, so I won't be touching on that much today. But happy to connect offline on that. This is something that I've been very intentional about because managing your desk is a huge thing. So feel free to reach out to me directly, who wrote that, if you want to talk about it, or you can direct message me your contact info in the chat. In Zoom chat, you have the ability to send to everyone, or you can send to a specific person. I'd love to chat more about this one. Um, I want to jump down and do a quick debrief here before we move forward. So this is jumping out a little bit more of a meta. You can go back to the problems that I shared. Um, I will put that slide on screen here in a second, and then you can be able to toggle between the screen share that I have and the Miro board. Uh, I'm curious, debriefing this session, what did you love about how I set up this Miro board, how the session was facilitated, and especially thinking relative to remote work? Um, what did you hate? Notice it's the same as up above if you need the words. Where were times that you were a little lost or that things seemed confusing to you? And what questions do you have? And this is really about how the activity itself was set up and how Miro was used here and how this is a tool for facilitating remote work. So you can go ahead. I see folks already starting to add post-its. Feel free to do so. We'll give 3 to 4 minutes here. And then we'll take a few more minutes to discuss and debrief the activity. And if you want a reminder and kind of thinking meta about this, I'm going to go back to on my screen share. I have the planning for this session's problems slide. It may help you with kind of thinking about how you approach setting up a remote session this way. Give folks about 2 more minutes to do post-its. Give folks about 30 more seconds on the post-its. So if you have anything else you're finishing up, feel free to do so. All right, so notice previously I used a voting activity. We are not going to do that this time. We could, but I'd love to just open it for discussion. You can feel free to um, throw in a chat. We've got maybe about 3 to 4 to 5, maybe 5 max minutes left on this Miro board before I jump to the slides. I do want to note I will be addressing quite a few of these in the slides. And so that I'm going to go through after this as we jump back to the slides from the Miro board and talking about some things related to each of these post-its. But I'm curious relative specifically to the Miro activity or any of these post-its that really jump out at you. What might we want to talk about relative to how we experienced the Miro board? So I'll actually give that to the group first. You can feel free to come off of mute or you can write in the chat which one you'd like us to be able to talk about, and I can speak to those here.
I don't seem to be able to mute, or not mute, my zoom in on your view so that when things aren't clear to me, I have to switch back to my view.
Yes, the Miro board, which is fine. So one of the reasons I like the Miro activity, thank you for sharing that, Miranda. I really appreciate it. One of the reasons I like Miro is folks can just manage their own view. I still screen share. I almost sometimes when I'm doing a Miro activity, I won't screen share because I really want everyone to go manage their own view. In this case, because I'm facilitating a discussion, I'm screen sharing the chunk that I'm focused on, and then hoping to be able to allow you to go back and zoom in on which ones you need to see. I would say if I had to pick between WebEx and Zoom for which one I like better, it would be a hard choice. Zoom in general, I like the features and just the intuitiveness and the usability a lot better. But WebEx does have a zoom in on the shared screen tool and Zoom does not. So if you are doing a session where you are sharing something on screen, but people won't be able to access it themselves to zoom in, I recommend using WebEx because folks can zoom in themselves on what you're sharing. In this case, you can just switch to your window, which isn't perfect, but nothing is perfect. So
I've discovered that if I click on your avatar, Paul, my Miro view will follow your Miro view.
Sure. Yes, you can. So what you can do, this up here when you're in Miro, you can go to where that person is on their cursor. So I just went to where Ryan was, etc. And that is helpful for moving to where someone is if you don't want to have to look at their screen share. You can also do that. Thank you for mentioning that, Daniel. There's also a tool here there, bring everyone to me, or just bring someone to me. If you're doing way more complex activities, this can be useful. Like let's say you're all on a group call and just all hacking together in an architecture diagram or something. And someone says, oh, hey, where are you doing that at? You can just go bring to me and then go grab the person the same way you'd like hand them the marker and show them the part of the whiteboard you're working on. I saw a note about iterating on voting. Yes, I did a very quick vote because this is an hour-long session. You can do all of the things that you would do in person with Post-its faster in a Miro board in terms of deduplicating. There is not a way to not allow people to vote on their own stickies in Miro, so that one a little different. There, I guess I would say the complexity of your goal is what I think about with voting. So if we really need to like get down to a team as the two things that we're going to prioritize discussing or solving for in this meeting, then I'm going to very intentionally structure and use that structure to get us to that while still allowing everyone's voices to get heard. And I really like the way that remote tools do that. In this case, I wanted to quickly show the voting tool and show how we use it to kind of guide discussions and see what people are prioritizing, resonating with It also creates camaraderie around the Post-its that we put up. So a little shallower goal in a sense, or at least required less intentionality. Anything else on here that we want to chat about before we jump over? Miranda, great question. In Miro, there is not an automatic way to see whose Post-its are whose. However, it is very easy to make that happen. So if you want to, you just can change the color of the Post-it. So everyone picks a color. And usually what we do when we've done that in activities, is we just have our stack of our Post-its over here. So we say, all right, everybody grab a stack somewhere and make it your color. So I could have taken 30 seconds to have everybody get their own color. I will say that can become quite distracting. So I'd say only do it when it's truly valuable, because the other thing that you're able to just do is, hey, whose Post-it is this? And hope that they fess up, which usually if you're working with your team members, they're going to. But it often can also be really useful to see the color coding and what's showing up there as well. So is a really great feature to use with the colors. Anything else about using Miro or this activity before I jump into the rest of my slides?
Does it save this space? Do you get access back to this later?
Great question. Yes. So this is, in fact, here, I'll pull up this. Here's my Miro dashboard. So we use these for client stuff. We use these for internal figuring things out stuff. You can see all of them here. You can copy them. So this is actually a copy of one we did on Friday with our internal team of integers, folks at Integral. And so I have another version of it that we did to have the same activity. I wanted a practice opportunity and also gave us a chance for an internal discussion on this topic. I can save that. I can move things. It's a little harder to move things back and forth between boards, but there's some capability to do that. And it is saved. I will say Miro, the way they got to make their money somehow, right? And so they make their money by limiting you to 3 active boards. Once a board is not, if you're on a free account, once a board is not active, you can view it, but you can no longer edit it. Any other thoughts, comments, questions from the group? I will comment a couple of quickly that I won't cover in my slides, and then a lot of the rest of these I'm going to hit in the slides. So if you're feeling a little unresolved, some of why I'm intentionally moving past these is because I'll talk about some of these topics in the slides. You can resize the Post-its. You just grab the corner here and make it bigger or smaller. I've also found sometimes just zooming in, typing what I need to type, and then figuring out what size to make the Post-it works really well as you're doing these activities. It's certainly more tools than you would have in person with the Post-it, but also can be a little awkward or frustrating. I'll actually talk about that dynamic a little bit. Also really appreciated whoever added the accessibility Post-it. Thank you. My understanding is Miro has not added extensive accessibility tools yet, so this is not a great tool for inclusion in terms of folks that are using screen readers or other accessibility tools. There's a lot of things you can do personally to increase inclusion there and how you're using the tools the same way you would if you were all in person in a room. So if we were doing a Post-it and there's a person in a wheelchair that can't reach the whiteboard, we're going to have to figure out what to do about that. One of the beauties of technology is you can increasingly give people the control over their own machine that they're working at. And as long as your tools facilitate their accessibility, it can be accessible for them. I will fully acknowledge I don't know of a whiteboard tool that really has strong accessibility features. That said, Miro does at least have a thing on their blog about accessibility, and it sounds like it's something they're working to get in place. And I also think this is a great thing to be mindful of in remote work. I also don't have this in my slides, so I'll comment as per my example, if we all come to a room and there's one person in a wheelchair, we're all going to immediately know. And hopefully be kind and caring and accommodating and also just treat them as a person in the room. Remote work can make it hard to know things about people and be aware of them and be able to be kind and inclusive. And as a remote working company, you have to be more intentional, but also respect privacy and confidentiality. around understanding what people's accessibility needs are. We did not do that in setting up this session, so it's actually a pretty good call out. My apologies to anyone that has needs here that we did not ask to accommodate you. But that's a great call out. If this was a group we were going to be working with regularly, that's probably a thing that we would be asking about at Integral. It's something we regularly have been checking in on our folks as far as what they need for accessibility for remote working. And our leadership team does a great job of facilitating. Yes, sometimes these are inevitable remote work stuff. I'll comment more on those. There was one more. Where'd it go? Yes, Miro does require you to have a Miro account. And as far as being able to sign in as a guest, sadly, that's not something I have control over. I love Google for that. So Google Drive does allow you to let anyone with the link edit. I wanted to show Miro because I really want to show off some of the tools. If I was doing a session where I really wanted everyone to be able to contribute in an anonymous way or to more easily access it, I would probably do it in Google Docs. And I thought about doing things in Google Docs, including I did do the notes slide in Google Docs. There's lots of things you can do in slides or documents that do allow this feature. Right, I'm gonna jump forward or back, I suppose, to the slides. So I'm going to start talking at you a little more. So we've got through the show part. I want to do some telling about some other things that I've learned about remote work in the last 19 minutes here. Please feel free to come right off mute and interrupt me. There is also a raise hand feature. So if you go in, one of your options in your Zoom tools is to raise your hand, and I will see that raised hand and call on you, or you can just interrupt me flat out. Or you can post a question in the Slack. Yes, I see a thumbs up from Miranda. Thank you. She found them. So you've got also options for other emoji reactions. You can drop a question in the chat as well. I am watching the chat on my other screen here. And with that said, I'm going to jump in. So there's, I think, a few themes about kind of managing remote work and making it work for you that are top of mind for me. This diagram looks a little goofy, but hang with me for a second, and I'll use a couple of examples to help explain what I mean here. So you have asynchronous work and synchronous work happening all the time. These are not remote work concepts. In the office, you can go back to your cubicle and work asynchronously for an hour and agree to come back together to look at the results, or a day or a week, and then be in a conference room synchronous, or just sitting next to each other. In fact, you can be sitting next to each other and constantly flipping between synchronous and asynchronous work. Synchronous just means that we're both looking at and working on talking about the same thing at the same time, focused on each other as much as we are on the work. It's truly just in person, face to face, or you can even do synchronous. I've had synchronous work where we opened a Google Doc, we weren't even on a call, and we just both started editing together. So that's synchronous. Asynchronous is anything else where you could be doing it at the same time, or you could not. You are working relatively independently on your own time, stepping away when you want to step away. The other's participation is not required for you to do your work. There's a lot of flow back and forth between sync and async, even in person constantly. Remote work enables a lot more asynchronous freedom. And in my opinion, I think making the most of remote work is often about leveraging async appropriately. But doing that well really requires managing between synchronous and async, and also building up your asynchronous skills. Here's how I recommend to do that. So for asynchronous work to work, you have to have simple, clear documentation somewhere, both about how to do this and about what you're doing. We use backlogs for that with the Kanban columns of like each of the phases of work that something's in. So still defining the work, ready for review, ready to play, in progress, completed, accepted, stakeholder reviewed, etc. We also use Google Docs for specific documentation of certain things, or roadmaps, or architecture diagrams, etc. And we also, some of those architecture diagrams also live in our backlogs. Thanks, John. Really appreciate you joining. Have a great day. And then we also use GitHub for a lot of our documentation as well, and Notion that I mentioned earlier. But make sure you have places where there's documentation that exists, because if you're all working asynchronously, you need to know what you should refer back to for what you're doing and how you're doing it, and the content that you're building. Send that for offline review, send links, ask people for comments and edits, make sure that there really is engagement there. And then use things like Miro to do kind of what I think of as sync async at times, or iterative async. So this would be where you draft a Google Doc and ask people to go make edits, add comments, and then you do another review of it and send it out to them, et cetera. So leverage those tools to be able to move through things and have people go through things iteratively, asynchronously, and constantly build up your skills around that. I've been doing iterative async even in grad school a time ago that I won't mention the exact number of years now, I guess a little over 10 years. We were doing iterative async a lot for group projects where we would pass docs around and such. A lot of us have been doing this for a while. Even in the last couple of years, constantly there's new tools for how to do iterative async as people are remote working and how to manage it well. For synchronous, I highly recommend, and I'll explain the arrows in a second here, also to do lots of clear documentation and give people 24 hours at least to review things before you have a synchronous meeting. This is not a new practice. This is a great idea always. And the same thing for down here. Create a template for purpose, agenda, outcomes for all meetings. Create a notes and an action item template. Require it for all synchronous meetings. Even if it's just one sentence each, that's fine. The reason I think these things are so important to note for synchronous work and remote work is because if you're doing both of these things and you keep doing them and you make yourself do them, it enables you to discover what you can push to asynchronous. Sorry, accidentally went forward a slide. To your asynchronous work. So these two feed into each other and allow you to say, oh, you know, we had a meeting for that, but I'm realizing now that we put the notes together, we really could have just put the notes together asynchronously. And so you start to be able to do more and more of these two things facilitated by doing this for asynchronous, as well as just following a leading practice for synchronous work. The other thing I'll note here about synchronous asynchronous is you also sometimes need to move from async to synchronous. So moving noticing that like, gosh, we're iterating on this document, but we're really stuck. And it seems like maybe we're also getting lost or missing each other, or there's just a lot of stuff that is going to be hard to just keep hashing out asynchronously. So you might do this for a while and then realize, okay, we need to actually have a meeting. The goal is to hammer out all the comments and finalize the next draft to show to the client. And then we'll have that draft as the outcome and action items for how we're going to share that with the client. Questions about this diagram or kind of moving between synchronous and asynchronous before I jump forward to the next slide here? Yes, Miranda, great comment. You do need to plan for lots of different communication types and check in with your team, get to know your team on what works well for them. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. I also recommend using tools for these that give some flexibility in communicating through words, communicating through diagrams. Emojis are fantastic. Give lots of different, don't choose a tool that limits people's ability to get what they need to say out. I also recommend that you make sure you have your documentation and your communication tools up when you're having an in-person synchronous conversation of some kind. So I will just pull up the backlog if we're talking about where the work is at and what we're working on. I'll open a story. I'll open the notes from a meeting if we're talking about the meeting itself rather than just talking. All right, I am going to jump forward. That kind of goes with Miranda, the comments you were making, 100% agree. Over communicate handoffs, manage and create tools that manage cadences to keep those handoffs smooth and keep things both in synchronous and asynchronous working for your team. That does include time zones. I'm in Mountain Time right now. We have team members that are across several time zones at Integral. And then for our clients, we often have global time zones. I will say there's nothing perfect there, but at least always acknowledging it and working around it is important. And then doing that with your cadences of meetings as well. So one of the things that I really like to do for remote work, someone had mentioned in the Miro board, several people had mentioned kind of the lack of water cooler talk or being able to just kind of have casual face-to-face conversations. There's a lot of work or at least like awareness of work that happens automatically in office because you have that conversation while you're walking to grab lunch, or while you're standing in the break room, or while you're walking to the bathroom together, or right after a meeting before you head back to your desks. Asynchronously, the beauty is, in some ways, you would just send a Slack message or whatever chat system you use, an email, etc., to do that. But often you kind of forget, or you don't realize that that needed to happen. You don't know what you don't know. So cadences are so important. We use Agile at Integral, so we have our daily stand up, a daily stand. Some teams also have a daily stand down, and there's also, you can do the agile ceremonies for your demo, your IPM, which is when you plan the work that you're going to do. Demos where you show the work that was done. Retrospective to check in on the week. You can also have to set a weekly or a daily meetings for things that you would have checked in weekly or daily in the office. The one thing I would say here is err on the side of canceling any meeting the moment it doesn't have topics for 2 in a row, let's say. At the same time, start to schedule a cadence of meeting anytime you realize you're regularly scheduling ad hoc meetings. So as you start to set up cadences, it does take some extra management and intentionality there. And then I will talk a little bit more specifically about remote work communications in just a minute here. So I'm going to kind of hold off on saying more beyond kind of cadences and handoffs there. I will give one example to kind of talk about handoffs and go back of how we use backlogs at Integral. So at Integral, one of the beauties that if you're using this kind of system, we might have a story in our backlog that it's going to have to get written by a product manager, which requires talking to a whole bunch of different people. And so it starts off in goes from our icebox, which is just someday we'll build that story, to our getting defined column. Different teams do this a little different, but to give you an illustration of how these handoffs might be managed in the way that I'm describing. And I might send the link to that story to other people on the client side that also have access to that backlog website, and say, hey, can you go add these details or review this and see if it's accurate? Is this really the outcome that you want? And they might do it and immediately respond back, or the next day respond back and say, yep, it looks good, or add a bunch of comments. Or they might be really confused and say, I don't know what to make sense of this. And I'll say, cool, let's jump on a call. In either case, I'm not chasing down the story. I get enough defined that I think it's ready to show to my engineers. I've got what I need from the client, from some of our business folks. I think the story makes sense, and I think an engineer could look at it and make it playable. I then I move it over to our column that says engineer refinement, and our engineers can look at that story. And engineers will often go into that column when they have spare time in the day. I move it over there. I had no urgent need on that story, so I just move it there. But actually, an engineer has time later that day, and they noticed that it got moved. That was a handoff, just a soft one. And they review it and put a couple notes and block it and say, PM, look at my notes. I think this isn't ready to play yet, but could be soon. And then I make a few changes, really glad for the feedback on the story. And then I realized this is really ready to play and I want to move it forward. I shoot our senior engineer, our anchor engineer, a message and say, hey, could you take a look at this? What do you think we need to do to be able to play it? They tell me that we need to schedule a meeting with our enterprise level architect on the client side and 2 other teams that they think this will impact. We schedule that meeting and I block the story and say, need this meeting, and block it. I then schedule that meeting. We have the meeting, review the story on screen with those folks, add the notes, unblock it, move it to ready to play. And then an engineer can just pick up that story. Those are prioritized based on which ones are most important to play next. However, we really wanted the pair of engineers that was going to pick up that story to check in with the group when they started that story. And so in the story, there's a list of folks to shoot a Slack message to, or maybe there's actually a channel name that they can click on to go to a channel and say, hey, let us know when you start this story. We want to make sure that the other 2 teams are aware that it's being started. And so we block it and say, that's what the blocker says is actually ready to play, but read the notes for communication when you start it. Engineers see that it's blocked, they see it, they pick up the story anyways because they read the blocker, they make that communication and they continue working. And then we can do the same thing on the other end. The story gets completed, et cetera. I'll pause there, you get the idea. of how you can use these tools to manage asynchronously and moving back and forth to synchronous. I'm going to jump and talk a little bit about communications and culture building and kind of how to build remote work collaboration. So some of this I've kind of touched on already, but I specifically want to talk about how to manage towards it. So as you're trying to do these things of managing handoffs, using Slack and using email well, but then keeping your deliverables and outcomes in permanent homes like Cloud Docs and backlogs, et cetera, it will get messy. It will be painful. It will be frustrating at times. You need to commit, in my mind. I think the most valuable thing to do is commit as a team, and this is a little bit ironic, but commit as a team to single sources of truth. I'll talk about the salt shaker thing in a minute. And why the reason it's ironic is it's plural, but I'm saying single sources of truth for what? So our backlog is our single source of truth for our work that is being done and the status of work. So that means that I should never have to check anywhere other than the backlog to know what's going on with work. And the same is true for technical documentation is all on GitHub. We've agreed as a team that that is the most meaningful place, and we need to commit to somewhere where all of our technical documentation goes. Strategy documentation is in a specific folder for a specific project in the cloud. Our sales pipeline is managed in Notion in a specific part of Notion in a specific way. Commit to those. Now, what I mean by salt shaker, this is actually, if you Google search Danny Meyer, salt shaker or restaurant, you can Google search other things. This guy used to run restaurants, at really fancy restaurants in New York, and he wrote this article about the salt shaker method. I'll let you go read the whole article, but the general idea is this manager of this restaurant was losing his mind and ending up just screaming at his servers about the table setups because they just kept putting things in the wrong place. Now, it is inevitable when you're running a restaurant that the salt shaker is going to end up in the wrong place. And it does need to get back in the right place if that's part of the experience you're creating. And the key to the salt shaker method is going, oh, well, it is normal. And I'm going to continue to apply lots of gentle reminders to head towards our ideal goal, to head towards what we've committed to. That's so key for creating remote work culture. And with that, I think as you are salt shakering, it's really important to seek the signal. Don't try to control the noise. So you'll see the little diagram here. There's no world where just signal comes at you. You're always going to get signal mixed in with a bunch of noise. So you can't try to just prevent the noise from happening. But what you can do is constantly seek to pull apart the signal and the noise. And what do I mean there? I mean that there's 27 different channels that you're a part of. Which ones are important to you today? There's 27 things that your team needs from you, or there's a whole bunch of things that your team says is important to them or they need. And it's even more hard to manage that remotely. We kind of embrace the write more, talk more paradox. Take the time to just type it all out in Slack, have the conversation out in Slack. You have to have a big bandwidth for that. A lot of it's going to be noise so that you can find the signal. Also, if you have to, talk more, jump on a call more often. It is really common for us that we'll have a whole bunch of slacking about something, and then we'll be like, all right, let's get together and chat real quick now that everybody's had a chance to get what they have out and read what everybody else has had to say as best as we can. We need to talk now. So really embrace that paradox and go back and forth between using lots of communication to get the signal and noise out and then find the signal. And lastly, I did see someone mention not seeing faces. I am a big fan of video on. I've got my video on because I'm presenting, but also I'm a big fan of video off. For example, I think it would have been inappropriate or unhelpful for me to ask all of you to be on video. You joined for a webinar, you're eating lunch, you're multitasking, but thank you for being here. In the same way, establish a culture in your teams of saying, hey, when do we want to have videos on and when do we want to have videos off? Make it a thing that you could bring up at any moment. Hey guys, I think we should all just go video off. It seems like we're, that's not helping us and it's a little bit distracting, but I think we can have the conversations with our videos off. Hey folks, I'm really having trouble not seeing people's faces. Would we be willing to turn videos on? Because it seems like this is a face conversation. Make those normal things to talk about. Last slide. The biggest thing that I can say, I'll let you read through the bullets here and we will share the deck with you. I believe it might have already been shared. If not, it will be shared out afterwards. These are all things that are true in the office, but they become even more challenging at times with remote work. So the biggest thing I'll emphasize about the humanity and inhumanity of not being in the office together and having to figure out how to feel and be human and work together remotely, um, is to embrace the awkward. Each of us as people individually and as team leaders, we have to just go, oh, some of this is awkward. And you have to keep salt shakering, but also keep being human. In fact, it's often important to take the lead on being more awkward or extra about something, just to be clear that, yep, it's awkward and that's okay. That's part of how this is. It will become less awkward as you establish remote culture and people take ownership of making remote work for them. But I have yet to work remotely. And even as I've worked with teams for 6, 9, 12 months, awkward constantly happens and it becomes part of our culture if we're a strong team to just make that what we do. And that's one of the most important things I can say is as you continue to practice, really note what's different and be able to keep talking about it and know the things that are funny, that are awkward, etc. That is what I had to share today. Um, I am available to stay for a minute or two if folks still have questions or things that they would like to discuss. You are welcome to also drop off or drop questions in the chat or follow-ups with me, and I'm happy to follow up on those. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you joining today.